So thank you to everybody for joining us. And I seem to have started talking first, but the idea is not that I'm particularly leading the conversation, but that we're chatting.
But you have the tendency to do that.
I occasionally, but you have the tendency to have the last word. No, I'm not sure either is true. We actually haven't known each other super long, but obviously in the kind of Web3 world, 25 minutes can feel like a very long time, particularly at this moment. And I think in the world in general, of course, we've been living through, those weeks when decades can occur, rather those decades where nothing seems to happen, as I think either Lennon or Marx put it. And so the idea is that we just have a chat, maybe about what has driven us to this point. And I am going to hand over the baton, if you will, and get things kicked off with a bit of a kind of origin story from Marieke's perspective of how she got into the space, and then we can bring it all together. And I think we'll find plenty of different topics to get into. But we're also extremely happy to open it up to the audience and see if people want to kind of get involved in the conversation. Perhaps not invite everybody up onto the stage, but like metaphorically at least, go in that direction. Obviously I've cheated. I know a little bit of your path into Web3, not just at NEAR, but in your earlier part of your career. But maybe you can tell me something I didn't know about how you got to this point. But you are like superbly well qualified to be doing what you're doing. But give us an intro.
Cool. Well, super happy to be here. An intro to, so by background, I'm a computer science engineer. I don't know if you knew that. I finished my studies actually in China, in Shanghai. So I first learned Mandarin to finish my computer science degree. And then I worked for LVMH luxury group across Asia. Did an MBA because I understood nothing about business. So went back to London, and that's where I studied. And then went into strategy consulting. Realized it was not necessarily for me. I'm a doer and need to do stuff. And then after that, worked for Expedia, which was amazing. And it's when I was at Expedia that I got a call from a headhunter at the time who said, hey, there's this startup in Bitcoin. Do you want to join? I was like, okay, you're out of your mind. This is for drug dealers. That was back end of 2015, right? And so the mainstream image actually of Bitcoin, because at the time it was not blockchain, was not very good. But I was very lucky because actually that was working for Jeremy Allaire, who leads Circle, and so who's a very renowned entrepreneur. And I jumped in. It took me a while to figure out if I could jump in. And then I helped build a business for 4 years, so the business of Circle across Europe, and then also helped globally on, in particular, marketing. And so I've been already through, I'm sure we'll talk about like winter and what it means and drastic movement into the market. I also then, in 2018, I had a kid and I decided to change slightly things, and the company was moving from B2C to B2B. So I went more traditional. I worked in a bank for NatWest. I led Metal, which is a neobank. So I was the CEO of Metal. And then NEAR reached out last summer, and when they reached out, I thought, oh my God, if what they say is true, if the tech that they describe really exists, then this is the real deal. And the people I met and what I could see from the technology were just phenomenal. And so I'm actually, I think, very lucky to be working for NEAR.
I think we're both lucky to be involved with NEAR. And maybe to explain, Marieke is running the NEAR Foundation. And we can actually, it's an interesting topic to dig into what that even means and how it sort of functions. It's a good example of really a new form of organization, frankly, that is decentralized in a bunch of different ways, and is much more sort of championing a movement and building an ecosystem than running things in a very kind of top-down manner. But to jump on some of the things you said, I think I was going to say something cheeky about we forgive you for working for a bank, but in this particularly in this sort of DeFi, DeGen environment, but maybe I almost refrain from doing so because obviously we're at a time when we're having to deal with a lot of challenges, even systemic ones within the space. So we should show sort of, I think, a humility in the face of that. And I think other topics we can pick up on is that I also had the good fortune to meet Jeremy Allaire at different points in his journey. And look, he's he's a super approachable guy. I'm sure you know him better than I did, but I met him when he had sold his video enterprise video business, and then I then met him again when he was pitching Circle. Who's familiar with Circle, by the way, in the audience? Roughly speaking, yeah, because it's pretty mainstream. It's been around for quite a while, and done a really good job of grasping the overall opportunity, and then and working out what needs to be built and done, and then building businesses around that. Again, you would know better. But I was just going to say, and I think this is relevant to the times we're sort of living in, Jeremy has just a conviction, a level of conviction, and I think a clarity of communication, and a style of kind of getting up and just, you know, breaking down, look, there's this enormous market opportunity here, and being comfortable that I don't know exactly what steps, you know, D3 to Z are going to be. I can work out what ABC is, but I'm just going to be, but I know where I'm going to end up. So I'm just going to take him, and I'm going to show great positivity and energy, and I'm going to do what's necessary right now and today, and we'll work it out. And I think he's had very good success with Circle. Would you agree?
I completely agree, and I think that's the trait of visionary, right? Which in a way, it's like, you know, visionary are able to see the world. They're able to actually glue things together, and it makes sense. And I think working for people like that is absolutely fantastic. And I would say Ilya, who's the co-founder of Near, is exactly the same fashion. And I think it's absolutely amazing to work for people like that, because you can see through their eyes. They see things that we don't, or at least I don't think I see them. But then having an opportunity to say, okay, I see where you want to go, and I can do 1, 2, 3. And one thing I find fascinating is that, in particular with that type of leader, every time you have a one-on-one, you feel like, okay, now I caught up, right? I'm up to the level to what you said. And when you think you reached out, then they're again like 20 steps ahead. But I think that's really stimulating also from like a thinking perspective and how you can change the world, because sometimes, you know, we all have those grand ideas of open web is better, it's going to create fairer economies and better distribution and so on and so forth. But sometimes it can feel like intangible, right? And how do you actually get to that? So I think definitely I would agree. And the other thing, and the other trait I would add is resilience, because it is very, very hard to go through that. And I remember Circle, when I joined, was less than 50 people. The number of people who, number one, thought I was completely crazy and out of my mind. And number two, the number of people to whom I actually pitched, you know, what is Circle, what is the app? And at the time I used to give Bitcoin to people a lot, because we had Circle Pay, which was like an app. Just give me your phone number and I can send you Bitcoin. And people used to think that this was completely crazy and insane, right? And it took like a long time to completely iterate on the same message until you finally crack through. So I think a level of resilience when you are like at that level, I think is also really important.
And as you said, the way I sometimes think about sort of the entrepreneur's role in, I sometimes phrase it kind of stretching the bungee. You use bungee, and when you probably,
no, but
you know, everyone use the word bungee. You know, when you're sort of trying to fix something to a car roof, whatever, you kind of like, you got to sort of stretch the bungee like so far, like that, so it doesn't snap, because obviously it snaps back in your face or whatever. But that's always your role to be doing that, and so getting that teamwork between that visionary drive and that leadership, and then the team that's got to make sure that it all kind of you get traction is super important. And so I had been fortunate enough to also encounter the Near team by way of several introductions. That sometimes I think it's always a positive reinforcement when you get introduced several different directions with the same positive reference. Back in 2019, I think right at the beginning of 2019 originally, and with a view to whether or not I would join the council, and so I wanted to kind of kick off a conversation about, or a little kind of passage here about, you know, what is the foundation? How does the council sort of sit within there? You know, I had been there a couple of years when I was introduced to you as a prospective, CEO. Had the opportunity to go for a run and chat things through, walks or runs. Either of them, they can be really good ways of doing things. But I'll leave it to you. Like, how's it functioning, and how's it different from a normal council that you might be working with, or a normal board, and how's it different from a normal organization, and maybe like, where is it and where is it going?
Yeah, and I think so. That's one of the things that in a decentralized ecosystem, it's quite different actually from like, centralized organization, whereby if you have actually a top-down organization, it's actually quite simple in a way, because you set the vision, the mission, and then you get the team to do it. In a decentralized ecosystem, every pebble plays its own role, and so the foundation in the Near ecosystem is only one of those pebbles, and it's only one of the things that actually has and plays a role within that. The origin of the Near Foundation is actually interesting. So within the entire open web space, it's actually very important to abide by decentralization. And therefore, one of the key things is actually making sure that the technical teams and the people who are working on the protocol and on applications are not the same team also, that the ones that are looking, for example, after the treasury or are making governance decisions and so on and so forth. So if you think of how Near was created, Near started in 2018, by the way, in the last bear market. So that was, no noise, no hype, just build. And then over time, the team grew, the token became alive, and then there's need to actually decentralize and unplug the team and the protocol from actually the rest of the operation. So that's what happened actually 2019. And so the foundation, what do we do as a foundation? We have basically 3 mandates. One is we're here to help raise awareness very broadly. What is open web? What is Web3? What is Near? Number 2, we're help to support. So we do look after quite a large part of the treasury of Near. How can we help support entrepreneurs and builders, whether it's directly from us or actually it's via grant program or via ecosystem funds that we continuously decentralize in the ecosystem. And part number 3 is actually how can we help stimulate the right governance and have the right regulatory engagement within the ecosystem. The thing I still find to this day most challenging is that, again, we're only one pebble within the ecosystem. Yes, a pebble that has quite a lot of influence, but we cannot do everything. And there is almost, a default pass back of the entire ecosystem to go back to the foundation. And that's something that, sometimes we struggle with because we want to help and we want to do it. But we could do that 6 months ago or a year ago. Today we can't. The number of projects and builders and the number of DAOs and the number of people that are building on Near is just astonishing. We've passed 14 million wallets. We have over 700 active DAOs and the same number of active projects. So it's not possible for an organization barely of 70 people to just look after that entire thing. So I think that's when, thinking through what do I not do, which is the opposite of what you would do in a traditional organization.
I was going to prompt you to talk about kind of nearby the numbers, which you started doing there, but also maybe for folks listening into our very private Fireside chat, kind of what is the vision for where Near wants to get to? Because if we go back through a little bit through the history of blockchains and sort of layer ones, and there was this kind of time when Bitcoin obviously was the whole story, and people described a little bit Bitcoin as being like internet protocol. It was like that IP stack, that technology stack was going to be the thing upon which all applications were built, and it was a little bit sacred and we shouldn't touch it and whatever. People tried to do that, different sort of colored coins and Mastercoin, and people are still trying to do it with things like Rootstock and so forth, but then there was the shift to Ethereum, and people actually thought they were pretty crazy at the time with attempting to do what they're doing and build this sort of world computer, and that turned out to be reasonably successful, at least for a few applications. And then the challenge was how to get this thing to scale, and scale in terms of cost, also scale in terms of transaction speed. And so a lot of people came up and started a little bit that were called kind of Ethereum killers. And in a sense, they were never Ethereum killers. The idea was not, it's not a zero-sum game. There's a lot of room. It was felt back then for many different chains to succeed. And they were more kind of like Ethereum flankers. It was like, let's try and solve some of these same problems. We have a bit of the advantage of having a bit of a clean sheet of paper, and let's execute fast and do that and build our own community. If we roll forward to where we are now, rather than having kind of a half a dozen folks who are kind of, operating alongside Ethereum at layer one, which, and that's probably the big ones, number that many. We're in a world where actually there's about 115 layer one blockchains out there. And we counted for a pound, we did like 22 different bridges. And even though I was just talking to someone who'll remain nameless about the topic of kind of aggregating bridges and so forth, we seem to be heading to what you could think of as a very cross-chain, multi-chain kind of world, upon which all of these different decentralized applications are going to be built. So I guess the question I was going to pose is where does NEAR sort of see themselves fit within that story? What are you looking to achieve? What's victory? And you got some numbers you laid out there. How does that compare to other players? And how are you going to be certain that you've got to where you want to be?
Yeah, so the one big motivation we have is actually users, right? Can we get to 1 billion users doing something on NEAR protocol? Whether they know that it's on NEAR protocol or not, doesn't matter, right? And actually success is pretty if they don't know that it's on NEAR protocol. But so that's the big thing that we follow on. So forget about, price, forget about TVL, forget about all those metrics. It's really like about usage. And then to get to that, I think one of the fundamental thing is actually usability, right? Is the protocol really usable for users, for end users, but also for developers? And that's really hard to achieve. And actually, I think that's where NEAR in its original design is pretty phenomenal, because as an end user, you can have experiences that look much more like Web 2. For example, we do a partnership with Sweat as an app. NEAR is embedded. It's completely transparent for the end user. So I think that's pretty magic. Like accounts, Marieke.NEAR or whatever, like those are seamless. And the way you can handle your keys, it's also seamless.
You got Marieke.NEAR?
I do.
Yeah. And I guess you were going to, I thought I was privileged to get Richard.NEAR, but
But no, there was someone else. So those things are really important, but also usability for developers, right? So if you want to get to 1 billion user, you actually need a lot of developers to develop a lot of things that are going to be ultimately used. And so, we've announced last week at Consensus, but we are also JavaScript enabled. And, within the crypto landscape, it's true, it's a lot about Rust and Solidity, and that's great, but those are like super ninja coding skills, right? And so not everybody is actually attuned to being able to do that. Now, if we have a platform that's also open to JavaScript, that's also opening up new possibilities, and actually it's opening up, therefore, more developers to create more things for more users to get. So for us, it's really about this end user game. It's like, can we get 1 billion users on the NEAR protocol? Can we therefore create an economy that's self-sustainable on the NEAR protocol? To your point earlier on, there's often like Ethereum killers or one chain versus several chains. We are much more like about interoperability and plurality into chains. Now, if you ask me, is it going to be 5, 10? I don't know, but definitely several, because several have different attributes for certain things. And for example, we have a way to bridge from Ethereum to NEAR, which is seamless and fantastic, which is Aurora. The CEO of Aurora, by the way, is here, so highly encourage anyone interested to speak with Alex. But we do have ways to actually create those bridges that are completely seamless, right?
Yeah, so one way someone on our team was describing the way it might sort of work is that rather than it being like the current Web 2 world of infrastructure, back-end infrastructure, where you have Amazon and just a few other players that dominate, like sort of half a dozen where you run your apps, dominated by AWS. It's rather a way of thinking about it is like the world we have today with mobiles, where there are many devices, many versions, and so forth, and apps kind of need to be compatible with all of these effectively to work. And so there's levels of abstraction that deliver that cross-chain capability that people are building. It's an interesting area, I think, of development if people are looking to build things, and also that you've got this topic of, you mentioned JavaScript, capabilities on NEAR and getting away from some more arcane languages. That speaks to one of the opportunities that we see, which is that at the end of the day, if we were to put a number on how many people are developing in Web3 today, I think someone talks about sort of 18,000 or whatever.
It's tiny.
But I think, I heard someone challenge that the other day. They say, well, that's.
Well, it's only full-time people, right? Because I think how many people are actually, and I know that from my team at Metal, the number of folks who were doing stuff on blockchain but had a full-time job probably don't count in that. So.
Yeah, exactly. So there may be some not counted, but even then, I think within the 18,000, some of them maybe not full-time focus, but it's not many. The total number of developers in the world is more like 40, 50 million by some measure, probably not getting into kind of Excel macros or something, but reasonably kind of professional developers. So it's literally a drop in the ocean. So the question is, how do we facilitate talented people coming in from academia, from other startups, from Web 2 companies and into the space? And so, we've been looking collectively, we have a program at Fabric called FabricX, which is about, investing in talent effectively at the idea stage, and then facilitating, everything for them to, come up to speed with whatever appropriate technology stack. And, as you said, NEAR has this very open, inclusive approach to, a rising tide is going to float all boats, just like a falling one can reveal who's not wearing any swimming trunks, and so there you want to encourage that, and that was one of the big attractions to me from the kind of the ethos when I was sort of looking at joining in. And of course, as a venture investor, or as a venture contributor, as we like to call it, we also have a similar approach. Whilst we're invested in various different ways with NEAR, we're not exclusively invested in NEAR, when we've got a lot of different sort of participations, and so we're looking to see how we can collaborate and get people into the community. And it's kind of like you don't force anyone to drink. You just say, like,
yeah,
here's some great technology stack. Here's the capabilities. Yeah. You make up your mind. What you want to do. But that way, we're going to move everything.
But I think for that to happen, there's two things. One, there's actually the mainstream narrative is still very much about price, and actually what's happening right now doesn't help, right? So it's very much Bitcoin price. It's very much this is not sustainable. It's very much about the impact on climate. So there is a broad stream narrative that actually doesn't help recruiting people in. That needs to change. Again, what's currently happening doesn't help. But for example, on sustainability, there is a different way to actually do blockchain that is completely carbon neutral. So NEAR is audited, we're carbon neutral. The biggest carbon footprint we have actually is our team, because we even, we take into account the entire ecosystem. And it's actually people traveling that are creating a footprint and an impact. So mainstream narrative needs to change, because when that changes, then people can actually join in. Then the second part, and Sherif is here, leads our education program, but education is really important, right? What is it actually like? What is Open Web? What is Web3? What do we mean? How can you actually start getting your feet in? How can you start and try, right? Like, look at the tools. And we believe the being open, inclusive, and being also very local is really important. So our approach is also to be very local, because speaking English is still very much a privilege. And so if you can speak in the local language and have the local community, then you can actually do that. It's going to take a long time. My hope, and we've seen that over the last 6 months, the amount of Web 2 talent going into Web 3, and I'm sure you're seeing the same, is humongous, right? It's just, there's a wave and the tide. And I'm not seeing that stop, even though the last couple of weeks have been very turbulent. I'm still seeing a lot of people who are in Web 2 and who are saying, like, this is it. I can see it. I understand it. This is going to change the world. And so I want to join.
So maybe we can come back to that change the world question, because I'm sort of thinking about it, and we've been gradually, I think, maybe defining a little bit what sort of NEAR stands for, but it may be useful to talk about, what are the core capabilities of the open web, of Web3, that make for really interesting applications. Why is it going to change the world? I mean, we're at Fabric, we kind of talk about its superpower as being the ability to convene and coordinate people, to collaborate around quite complex tasks, to share their identity, the data, and the value, and so forth. But Marieke may have her own kind of version of that. And look, I think I totally agree. We're seeing a great talent come into the space, and with each wave, we see not just more people, but with different skills. And in particular, this time, of course, we've seen talent that generates intellectual property, be it musical or from, in drama or in graphic design or in, Hollywood, Bollywood, and indeed athletics and other types of sport. They've been coming in, so that's been interesting.
Yeah,
it's been the understanding that actually that it creates an opportunity to connect that talent with fans in a totally different way. So that's been a way forward, and maybe some examples that you want to kind of talk about there. But I just wanted to talk about the thing that is still a brake on progress for us. So I think the sustainability question, and NEAR, I think, addresses it very squarely, is also still a little bit of a distraction, even when you're talking about Bitcoin and proof of work, because net, I think it drives an optimization of systems towards renewables and in general, computer systems. I think it's a distraction, and unfortunately, even at the kind of governmental level across Europe, that becomes the main stick with which to beat the kind of the industry. So I think we do need to proactively navigate that by explaining why maybe this is not the point. However, on the other side, having incentives baked into a software platform so that you build an app and you can give incentives to people to participate and participate positively in the network, so that, you know, if you rebuild Uber, the drivers and the riders can own pieces of it and benefit from it. We're looking at projects like that. Or if you took Twitter and did what is called the Elon drop and then gave everybody who's been a good participant in the Twitterverse a piece of the Twitter pie, you know, and everybody owned it and had a stake in the upside, you can see how that could, you know, that incentives would work. Now, it's just the case that you can't have that incentive layer and have it working. We need to kind of help balance and hopefully in different ways kind of dampen through these cycles. I want to be careful, we don't want to reject that because it's so potent for solving problems we wouldn't be able to solve together otherwise. But, you know, we do just have to acknowledge that it means that if people are along for the ride and things move down very fast, that, you know, then they can, as the industry likes to say, they can get wrecked. So we have to be proactive about the kind of the policy approach we take around that. But I mean, back on the kind of sort of sport and creatives and what are your favorite ways in which the world can be improved? I mean, I think more sport and getting more money to more creatives in the long tail, that is a way of improving the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's been fascinating actually to see some of those big use cases, you know, actively chasing near actually and wanting to find a chain and how to build on that. And so, for example, SailGP is a sailing competition that's been created by Larry Ellison, and we're actually looking at how can a DAO buy a team in a professional sports. And that, I think, is fascinating. So it has a lot of challenges, right? So how do you do that from a legal and compliance perspective? And as you were saying, our view on that is long term, right? We're not buyers of hype, but actually, how do we build things long term that will actually fit within and also help protect society? So, but that concept of like redefining fandom, I find that fascinating, and I think that's really interesting to see. We've basically recently also partnered with Sweat Coin. So Sweat is an app. Actually, it was created in the UK. They have 100 million actually users, which is gigantic. But now they're embedded into Near, and so as a user, the app was prone to be actually on crypto, but was not on crypto. And so now it is, and it's built on Near. In the last 2 months, it's created over 10 million wallets on Near, which means that now we are 8% of the total wallet creation in the world. So that's also another thing that's huge. Is like, how can you have onboarding from Web 2 to Web 3 and have therefore a participation in the economy? So you move, you walk, therefore you get actually, economic incentive to be healthy and fit. So I think that's also really interesting. That goes into the category that we call, X to earn, right? So learn to earn. We have another one, Open Forest Protocol, planting trees to actually earn. We need reforestation, super important. The tracking of that, the actually tracking of carbon credit is massively important. Well, Open Forest Protocol signed a deal with Côte d'Ivoire. 20% of the entire reforestation is going on that protocol. So those categories, and some people in crypto say, oh, the X to earn movement is gone. I completely disagree. I actually think we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg on that. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see the impact it can have, because if you map that to then we can be organized totally differently, and DAOs are a very good example, right? You can have local community people, key people who have a shared common goal, self-organize. I think if you map, X to earn, can organize yourself differently. Well, the way we work is completely gone out of the window, and so we can reinvent what we do and probably, focus more on the potential that we have and what we actually want to achieve. So I think that is the type of stuff that I think is really interesting. Now, the other side of that, and we need to think about it, is like what could go wrong, right? What happens when that doesn't go the way you were planning? And that's where, science fiction actually is a good place to read and to get very scared about, if you read Ready Player One, is that the world we want to create? I don't think that's the world that we should create. So that's one, is like, how do we actually think very through and thoroughly through what we build? And the other part is regulation. And I think, maybe having worked in a bank, but also having been exposed to other things, I think at heart, regulation is here to protect consumers. It has good intentions. And so finding and fulfilling those good intentions becomes really, really important and fundamental. Doesn't mean to apply the existing frameworks because they don't work, but it means actually having at heart, like, what does it mean to protect end users?
So I feel like I've been talking about how the people's view that the regulation is like the Achilles heel of the space is precisely wrong for many years, and I feel like maybe I should be stopping now, but I think actually the truth is we're only just getting to the point to really think through regulation that is fit for purpose in the space, and not just fit for purpose. What I mean by the kind of Achilles heel point is that, you know, I mean, I think we maybe got beyond the point that everybody thinks that Bitcoin is just for drug dealers, or that you're entirely anonymous if you use the Bitcoin network and so forth.
You're not.
The truth is that you can, you know, work out exactly who is moving what money where on these networks. You can allow possibly even for kind of compliance to regulation to occur on a per transaction level in real time. So that the potential is there to build systems that are frankly way more compliant and avoid much more money laundering and corruption than any of the existing banking system. But that's not going to happen unless there's a kind of, you know, from a blank sheet of paper rethinking of how you apply regulation to the space. So I think it's a huge opportunity actually to get that right. But it's not going to happen if we're just being told like, you're emitting too much carbon, or you know, you're just out and out to
but that's why I'm
destroy fiat currency.
That's why I'm excited about what we're trying to do, right? Because I think actually it's part of the dialogue, right? It's like, okay, we do have as technologists, I think, a role to play and a duty to help bridge the gap into like, well, this is the possibilities of what we can do, and therefore we also can, you know, listen to what regulators are trying to do and bridge that gap. And it's often not easy because it's two different cultures confronting each other, right? And it takes a lot of time and effort, and it takes really a lot of resources to articulate clearly and so on and so forth. But I agree with you. I think, especially in Europe, we've seen, I don't know why it's always on a Friday. It's always on a Friday afternoon. The regulators are issuing statements that are so blunt that then we have to say like, oh, no, cannot do that. And then a bunch of people end up working the entire weekend to try to say like, please don't do that. But it's always on a Friday.
Yeah, someone should tip us the wink a little bit earlier than that, so it doesn't have to be sort of Friday work. So we're sort of coming up to about sort of 10 minutes to go. So I wanted to just challenge everybody to think of some questions. If I said I would cold call people for a question, I wonder if they'd leave. Oh, we got them straight out of the gate, so why don't we do that? Because it's very easy to run out of time on these things.
Maybe say it and we can repeat it so that people hear it. Yeah.
Here we go.
Ah, perfect.
You were talking about increasing Web3 user base and developer base as well during the conversation, which was very interesting, by the way. What will drive the increased revenues into the Web3 ecosystem, which will ultimately pay the developer salaries for the increased developer base? For example, would that be increased uptake of commercial applications of Web3? And also related to that, how can you attract more users to Web3 technologies and make it easier to explain and for ordinary people to be able to understand Web3? Thank you.
I think maybe the user one first. Like the ultimate goal for users is not to have to explain, right? It should do something that is actually changing things for you, right? So the incentive for you to want to use it, I think that would be that one. Do you want to take the other one, economics?
Yeah, I mean, so maybe in a sense to combine the two of them together, one of my favorite examples for a Web3 application always was, and it's going on a slight limb here, always was a decentralized version of Uber. It would seem that something that is fundamental as the ability to get around from A to B should not be something that is owned by a private company necessarily, and one that is driven by a just pure profit incentive ultimately, and not just because of the users, but also because of the drivers, because you want a fair deal for everybody. So it seems like, I mean, I used to call it, wait for it, Duber, that something like that could and should exist. And actually, one of the 5 Alexanders who we're working with near Sasha had written a piece, it turned out, when we first started interacting, and you can find it online, about a decentralized Uber. And sorry, I'll get to my point here about user adoption, also about where the revenues are going to come from. And so you can conceive of something that is owned by the drivers, owned by the users, therefore kind of better for them because they have some participation and a share in the upside and the profits, and then any profits that exist from people coming in and paying for journeys can get distributed around. But beyond that, one of the benefits in the Web3 space should be that a driver doesn't just perhaps get a better straightforward economic deal, but they also can own their reputation. So that their history of drives they've done and how many stars they've got and how many comments they got and what that was, rather than being owned by Uber, is owned by them.
Take it somewhere else.
And therefore, simplistically, that means D-Lyft or whatever can then go and grab that information and use that in the context of the driver participating in Lyft. But even more than that, perhaps there's another application being built where that information can be extracted. And so my point about the revenues so that's how you attract users, because this fundamentally should be a better service, because if you have more drivers, you can have more users. It means you can get a better coverage at a lower price. And there are people trying to build that and work out how do we get away from the incumbents and build these new services. And there's going to be clear revenues there, and the revenues that's the revenue that's going to pay the developers' bills, because there's an application that's actually out there and working. I hope that comes to pass. Again, if you've got some ideas, let us know.
Thank you very much. I look forward to Duber.
Yeah.
Hi. My question is, during the last 1 or 1.5 years, there was a lot of initiatives, especially grant programs for many of our ecosystems. It could be like Near, Polkadot, Harmony, and so on. And it's huge funds which were distributed among the different projects. And a lot of these projects were building something really, really complicated. And in most cases, they are not deliver actually some expected business value, or maybe doesn't gather any users by the end. So my question, how we can redesign the system of receiving grants, or maybe that could be another Y Combinator who will deliver really interesting and really valuable for end users projects, and actually organized by Near or any other ecosystem. So what is wrong with that right now?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. So it's true, look, giving grants out without too much guidance in a world that is quite complicated, where people are trying to figure out what's going on, is very difficult. So the idea you're talking about, we actually are working on that very actively. A lot of other people are working on that, trying to figure out what's the Y Combinator of the Web3 and how do we help that. Pagoda, for example, which is one of the company within the Near ecosystem, is also working on toolkit for developers and entrepreneurs, things that are make it easier. Because what we figured out is that the pipeline is always the same. It's you build stuff, you need to figure out your token economics, you need to figure out your legal, you need to hire a team, you need to launch your product, you need to find your... So it's almost there's a playbook that can be applied to that. And yet we end up giving often the same advice. So systematically having that playbook, having something that is more guided for people so they can go through, is definitely a way. We do give milestones. We try to check on projects more and more often, so that also helps. But we're working actively on what you mentioned. So if you are interested, please let me know. There is quite a lot of work to do on that front.
And I'll echo that, just that there's a reason why Y Combinator has been very successful in producing great outcomes, because of the ecosystem and connections it brings together and the approach it takes. And so I think it's good to think about what that would look like in the Web3 space and make sure it's adapted to that. And then indeed that's happening at Near and elsewhere. And I've already mentioned our sort of FabricX program. It's not quite Y Combinator, but it's definitely an attempt to learn by doing what it is required in the space and to operate. And broadly speaking, we want to get initial 100K investment checks to 100 different entrepreneurs in the next 12 months. That's the kind of scale that we're operating that on, and where we can adopt some of the tooling either from Near or elsewhere that helps us plug into DAOs for identifying talent or expertise or additional top-up funding or whatever it is that's that's intrinsic to this ecosystem, then we totally want to do that. That all being said, we're talking about things not working out, and it probably was. This probably wasn't your point, but it may be worth just reinforcing. At the end of the day, we have to embrace failure,
Yes.
preferably fast failure, because it is impossible to really kind of, stake out a proverbial kind of moonshot and go for it and expect, even Elon had 3 rocket launch failures before the 4th one, kind of worked after he'd put all his money to work. So,
especially at the speed, I think, at which we go, right? So the approach, because you said something that was interesting, like, I actually disagree with like the statement of, a lot of those have not worked. It's true, a lot haven't worked, but a lot have worked out. And actually it's been an amazing fuel for talent and for starting to have people build on it. So then it's, it's a price on what's the cost to actually attract more talent within it, right? But the approach has definitely been like, try 1,000 different things, because within that, and we have a framework for like, who's behind, what's the deal, like we actually look at it very thoroughly, but even through that, you never know, right? So where's the next Twitter, where's the next Elon Musk and all that? And I think it's quite important to have that lens still to encourage.
I always love the story from Paul Graham at Y Combinator, how when effectively it was Dropbox and Airbnb that made up like 90% of the market cap of the companies they'd built at that point in time. I think it was around 2010 or 12, something like that, he was saying it. And he was just asked the question, by the end of the Y Combinator process, did you know it was going to be those companies, or even the stage after that? And the answer was like point blank no. Yeah. And then, the worst case is, even if there is failure, and it is important to try and build an ecosystem, which is what we're doing here, that embraces the possibility of failure, or even the beauty of failure, that you can cycle back, as someone who's passionate about the space and has got a talent, into another project fast, and then that helps another project. And so you haven't entirely failed for sure. You've taken your lessons there. Don't get me wrong, I'm not diminishing how painful it can be to go through that process. I've had plenty of those processes myself.
Richard, thank you both for a really interesting debate, but there's something you mentioned a little earlier which I'd like to pick up on. You mentioned the word education. Is it not time that we started to educate the next generation of young people who are coming into this ecosystem? Have we not reached the tipping point where we actually have something to offer, and we should come together in some shape or form to help people find that transition from education into employment in this particular space? Interested in your comments, please.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. So obviously, yes, education. Near Foundation has a very large education program, and the purpose of educating people is to actually find a job, right? It's like, how can you actually find something within the ecosystem? How can you also prepare yourself for the next generation of what's happening? I think it's fundamental to have that flexibility of actually what's the next thing that's coming, and how can we actually train and retrain different people. So we do that. We actually have a fellowship program, which I think is also a very good way to help people take that leap of faith and actually have that space where they can figure out, can I do something there? Is it helpful? Again, we're trying and trying to figure different things out, but I think it's almost a duty to help people be ready for the next stage. And one last thing on education, I actually think it's fundamental to have diversity and inclusion in education, because if the people who end up building the next generation of products are always the same people, we're going to have a big problem down the line. So I think it's extremely important that we remain extremely open, diverse, and inclusive on that front.
So I couldn't agree more with all of that, and we try and underline those priorities at Fabric. But I will say one thing, which is that yes, maybe we can promote Web3 and educate the younger people, but there's an extra benefit to that is that half the time, of course, it is very much the next generation who are educating us, especially in this space. There are people as young as 17 or 18 that we've been talking to about actively becoming part of the Fabric team, and we're very actively engaging with not just MBA programs, but universities and computer science departments, and not quite schools yet, but that would be great to do that over time, and in collaboration with any of you, and indeed Marieke and Nir. I think we're being
out of time. Yeah,
out of time.
It's flashing
big red zeros. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you all too.